The second split of Challengers EMEA is well underway, and in that rapid road to Ascension, I want to ask the question, how did we get here? The first split finished only last month, but already set the scene in terms of which teams we can expect to see represent their region come the end of the year. Now, this puts me in a position where I want to say, who are the big winners and who are the big losers? Now, just to preface this really quickly, I'm not saying that these guys are really bad or anything like that. This is just my personal opinion of the projections we had for some of these teams, who outperformed, who underperformed, and where I would rank them accordingly. I'm going to do one or two from each region, put them in this list that I've constructed here in my Challengers EMEA background. So without further ado, alphabetical order, let's get straight into it. The first region we're going to be talking about is DACH, no better than our friends across the pond. And we're going to start off with the W. And for me, it's got to be CGN. The fact that they were able to retain their league title, making them back-to-back-to-back champs, with the amount of talent that we've seen come back through, the ever-changing landscape of different rosters, rising stars, being 13-0 down on the first map of the grand final when they'd already played a best of 3 in that day. It's impossible for me not to whack CGN in the list to kick things off. It was a brilliant split one from them, and it looks to be going pretty well in split 2 as well. Then heading on to the not-so-fun side of the screen, I think most people already know exactly where I'm going with this one, but it has to be Focus, with an honourable mention of Eintracht Frankfurt as well, but I'll get to that one in a second. For Focus, they had the Ascension winning roster in the palm of their hand, giving away Fizzy to second place Mouse in their own region, second place Case in Spain, ideas that I'll get to in just a little bit, but I think, look, this is going to be one of the biggest what-ifs that we ever see in Challengers. Such a strong team, given up for sponsorship opportunities and being more locally integrated at their roots in DACH, I think is a massive misplay from these guys. And I would love to have seen the potential that they reached had they kept the roster. Sure, they've got a little bit closer to that now. Buka has gone over from Eintracht Frankfurt back to Focus. They've managed to retain Lime after that Case project I'll talk about in just a little bit. But disappointing. And for Eintracht, yeah, I don't think the expectation is as high. I want to know from you guys in the comments, do you think that if a football team or an organization based from a sporting event brings in a roster in an esport, do they then have the same expectations? For me, I think it's a big name to be carrying on your shoulders, but also they had all the right parts. Buka, who I was just speaking about, Leosen, Lucke, good players on their day, but not really living up to those prospects, I think, in Split 1. Split 2, different story. I think they've looked very good. I'm looking forward to seeing how they're doing, and it does seem like Focus are better off for it as well. So, one to keep eyes on, but these are my answers for DACH. That's what I think. Feel free to debate it in the comments. Moving swiftly onwards to our brothers over in East, this is a simple choice for me. It's got to be the guys at Chippy Chappers here. I mean, this is just one of the craziest stories that I think that we're going to see in Challengers all year. A completely unsigned team, which directly ties to the unfortunate biggest loss that I think we get in East as well. One of the final entries to the lineup of teams that we got, making it through the regional promotion system. Top players from ranked with little experience in a tier 2 circuit, just winning all of the important games, not having the craziest regular season, cheating accusations thrown in amongst the community, even being forced to change out a player in the form of Outcast due to his personal reasons, studies, you know, no pun intended, he was gone from the team. But yeah, they knocked Ascend out in the first phase of playoffs, the third place team from Ascension, which will immediately sort of slot them in on the opposite side here in the loss side. I mean, just so sad for them. And then look, it wasn't the end for Chippy Chappers. They went on to then beat Diamond in the lower final as well, after putting up an invincible regular season of their own. Ridiculous turn of events, which has very quickly cemented a lot of those names on people's radars, such as Sakapa. I think we'll be seeing a lot from him in future as well. And then for Ascend, on the flip side, to talk about them quickly, not to dwell on the negatives, but they kept the roster the same. They only swapped out Monster for Chihuahua. It felt like maybe even they'd bolstered themselves a little bit. They went through some struggles behind the scenes, don't get me wrong. There were definitely a lot of things going on in the background for this team throughout this year, and I can only wish that those improve as we head on later into sort of the Ascension stage of the year. But they'll be surprised to see themselves there because it just doesn't facilitate enough points, the place finish that they ended up getting. So I think, look, a Champions winning roster up against the hopefuls of Chippy Chappers and the dreams and ambitions they have of their own. I think this was a crazy clash that we saw in Split 1 and has very much changed the dynamic of what to expect from East for the rest of this year. Then on to France. I've already spoken at great length and with these guys as well. Job life for me. I think, look, a brand new project when your previous one fell short in the previous year, trying to ride the coattails of Gentlemates and find success of their own. Look, they struggled, but they put their faith into the hands of Robbie BK and Lohan from the coach slot from Portugal, from a second place finish of his own to not quite making it out of play-ins, to then, bringing in some new prospects like Kamek and Jazz as well. I mean, they look insanely good, these guys. Magic came in. He's, retained his role in the French region as being one of those Benelux players. I mean, the fact that these guys were able to win the league, I think was really impressive. And it all stemmed back to a rivalry they had earlier on with our team, who I'm going to put as the first of a couple of teams who I think lost out. DVM, the prospects these guys had. You had New Zero coming back from Carmine Core. Look, a couple of players from VCT last year in general as well, right? Kellogg's too, from Heretics. You've got to be thinking about Cadavra, who's now, flown the nest and joined up with that Gentlemates team. Jusu, Mark Tolino from the previous Job Life. These guys had all of the names and all of the talent to go ahead and make a really strong run in the competition, but they just fell short, and they fell short really early as well. I don't think it was what any of us really expected, but maybe personalities within the team prevented it from happening, not too sure. And look, similar story here for Zerons as well. They were making a lot of noise in the off-season. I think my eyes were firmly focused on Lux9 and Vikaj coming out of the Spike Nations tournament, which they finished third in. He was looking like the real deal. You had JD coming in from, previous Gambit rosters that you'd seen in the past, trying to stoke up some embers of his own personal career, which had gone quiet a little bit. Unfake from a Team Queso team, which I felt looked really underrated from last year in Spain as well. But I don't know, maybe these guys just aren't favourable anymore in a division with the amount of quality that France has. It's one of the most competitive leagues in Challengers, and yeah, they weren't quite up to the mark. So those are my choices for France. Let me know what you think. Next up, I have Italy. For me, I can only see one winner here. It's Desire. These guys have been absolutely insane. They haven't lost a single best of 3 this calendar year, and only one map which came in their grand final. They were on par to be matching Apex's invincible run themselves, and this is something strange about Ascension this year as well. We've seen a lot of teams domestically be so dominant, and these guys are pretty much the epitome of that. Waddle has moved over onto the IGL role from the Focus roster that fell short last time around. The big test, though, is going to be the international stage. I think we fully expect these guys to be making it to Ascension and to represent Italy at this point in time. It's a question of how much more they can do. Another name to look out for on this one would be Caden. I've been loving what he's been putting out. And in terms of big L's, it's kind of hard to pick one out when everyone else is a level below. I don't think there's really too many I would have had eyes on. Maybe the Q-Lash project with a couple of names that I remember. But other than that, I don't think there are any real notable mentions to be putting in here for Italy. So we'll be moving on next. Alphabetically, it would be MENA, but we're skipping that and going straight to North. I didn't have too much to say about the Middle Eastern region, and with it being split up into 2 sub-regions, difficult to really talk about in terms of losers and maybe NASA for not paying their players. North, though, big winner. Easy enough for me to call it, and as someone who works in the region, I know firsthand, sweet and sour. And look, again, I'll hold my hands up high. I predicted these guys to finish dead last. They ended up second. They'd only just been promoted, and they not only did they finish second, it's to the most dominant roster I think we've ever seen within Tier 2, within the second tier, generally speaking, right? An Apex team which didn't lose a single map. These guys have been so impressive without an organization, again, kind of like Chippy Chappers, and I think that's a running theme for the big wins here too. People who overshoot when they maybe don't have the resources, but they have their own personal plight, and it's enough to stick them up the rungs. So I've been really, really impressed with Sweet and Sour this year. I'm looking forward to them potentially representing Polaris in play-ins. The question is, can they keep on to that second spot? Because the rest of the midfield is very competitive. Speaking of midfield, I mean, look, Metasport, I think, will probably be the loss that you take for the league here. For me, they came in and spent money on 3 bigger names, Dreamas, Vong, Hearthbeat. Did they get the results? Not really. They made playoffs by the skin of their teeth and then ended up crashing out with sort of 2 wins on the bounce. They brought in the names to support the newer talent, Demiurge, who's now moved on to Formulation, and it's looking nice, right? Prospect-wise for him. I think Spolen got done a little bit dirty coming out of this first split where they decided to nuke the roster. But yeah, they were fighting a losing war against an Apex team where ultimately they had to concede. They want to stick a little closer to the radiator during the esports winter, and honestly, I don't blame them for not spending out loads of money, but at the same time, it was a project which looked most interesting to me and perhaps would have been that direct competition to the top spot. Just didn't quite happen. So that's my winner and my loser for Polaris. From one P to another, it's P for Portugal. And again, I only really see winners here. I think in a league much like Italy that is usually having the headlines stolen by one, there are a couple of names that I want to throw into the ring here. That's going to be Pedro, or PPP for short, and Impulse GW as well. Both teams which have taken maps off of SOAR when it looked like it would be a write-off in terms of them locking in their spot to represent the region again, but they've started to test them, right? SOAR took a loss in the first game of the regular season in the first split against Impulse, and then look, you even saw it with Pedro in the most recent second split that we've seen. I think it's been great work from both of them. Whether they can seal the deal and actually have them at odds in the latter stages of the season in playoffs, I think will be interesting to see, because there's been a bit of a head-to-head between the two of them as well. And in terms of breaking that mold and really securing yourself as a second spot, I think it's almost my direct comparison with something like Polaris, for example, when you had OnlyFins and Sweet and Sour both floating around underneath the cream of the crop. So we'll have to see where it lands for both of those. But again, more winners to be heralding here. Positivity, guys. I'm not being a hater, but there is more to add, and I'll get there very shortly. Speaking of more to add, I've split the pin a little bit on this one, and maybe people disagree with me, but for my big winner, I'm gonna say Casse Esports. But before you scream at your monitor, my big loser is also Casse Esports. Now, the reason being is Casse, they ended up in second place after a terrible regular season. They were 1 game away from being out of it, and it could have been Zeta Gaming that we saw in that situation instead. But finally, they found their footing under Una's leadership, who, in terms of man management and implementing his style, just needed a little bit more time. And you hear it from players such as Lime saying, yeah, he's a very experienced coach, and you can see why he's at the top level. The issue is you've got to buy into that project. And again, when you keep going, chopping and changing, you had Lucas Rojo in there before, we had Foxy, Patatek now, who's gone on to greener pastures of his own. Yeah, I think it's just been a bit of a tumultuous time. And of course, the loss is the fact that, well, they didn't manage to win the title. They won it the last 2 times, back to back, no problem. The expectations were there. It didn't come without them chopping and changing a lot of players, like Kiles, for example, who left, Roxy, ones that we would become, you know, accustomed to seeing within this region and flying the flag for themselves. So disappointing, shutting down operations as well and not even being there for a second split. You can only say that you're disappointed, but at the same time, you've got to look at the positives and some of the names that are still kicking around and what they're going to do in the region this year. With that being said, we move on to the final region and probably my favorites for Ascension. No spoilers just yet. I will be ranking them from head to toe in a video which you'll be seeing very soon, but we're heading to Turkey, and I think the most scary part about this for me as well, when I'm speaking of looking towards Ascension in the future, has to be Fireflux, because they've finally woken up. This sleeping beast which has managed to just find some kind of way to bottle playoffs every single time has locked it in, and they are looking damn good, right? They won a LAN event at the ESA Esports Arena. They'd never made it there in Istanbul before. They lost Woot coming into the year. There's such a strong talent pool in Turkey, though, and I think you see that reflected in the fact that they brought new names in, well-established names, and were able to do what they've done. I can continue to expect seeing that throughout the second split and, yeah, onto the end of the year as well. My loss, on the other hand, for Turkey, I have a couple of names. And again, it's because of this talent pool. You even see it in VCT. There's, 10 slots for Turkish names if you don't speak good English, which, for a lot of the players, they find it easier to communicate in their native language, right? They maybe don't have that facet to their game. You even look at CNED, who moved back into a foot team, taking a spot away from another player ultimately because he struggled in Na'Vi. He's never been a particularly vocal guy, but you start to see the merits of him communicating in Turkish. And to sort of open up this wider conversation, yeah, I had big ambitions for Digital Athletics. This was a mixed roster, one that wasn't speaking natively Turkish, but you've got to look at some of the players that were on there, right? Like Doma, the old guard, Cooper in there as well, and even Deepmans, a guy who we'd seen on Wave Esports being, a real prospect, a Turkish superstar in the making, that just never quite hit the heights. And while I don't know necessarily what the politics were behind the scenes, because there always is at this tier of play, it just looked like a project I was hoping to see more from, especially considering the fact that they were the names, or it was the organization, which represented Turkey last time around. Now moving to a point system, well, that makes life a whole lot more difficult if you want to qualify in the second split. And it's exactly why I now choose to introduce S2G as the next of those names in my list. They won the first split of Turkey last year around. They finished second. They had to go through play-ins. They got really close. And with that comes high hopes for the team. And as well, a bit of a feeder when you look at their connections with BBL, for example. Pora leaving, Rien's going off to Heretics, and even Lurzi as well. They picked up some good names on the other hand. Aslan Machado came in after the amount of time he'd spent on BBL, like I said, that link. JJ, Mooj, and you already had Russ on Duelist, who all the way back when these guys were, playing under a different banner, was still an incredibly strong Turkish talent. However, they missed out on playoffs entirely. They finished 5th in Turkey, and again, it just felt like didn't quite hit the heights that you would have been thinking they would have reached, right? The projections. And again, that is where we list these big winners, big losers, right? It's not like I'm saying individually these players suck or anything, but it's just when you have that weight on your shoulders, are you able to perform, or do you not quite reach the level that you're expecting? So that's it for me. That is all of the teams that I've come up with here. Again, let me know in the comments what you think about the choices I've made, whether you think I'm wrong, whether you think I'm right, or if there are any names that weren't mentioned here that you think, did better than you were expecting or did worse. Let me know. This is just for Split 1. I'll have plenty more content coming up towards Split 2. I've not really done too many solo ramblings in front of the camera before, so please let me know if this is something you're more interested in. But I plan on being back with plenty more Challengers content in the run-up to Ascension. So make sure you leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel as well if you like what you see. And with that being said, I bid you all bonsoir and good night.